In 2005, Hillsborough was a picture-perfect town where life seemed untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Nestled between rolling hills and quiet streets, the community was known for its strong ties and friendly faces. Everyone knew everyone, or so they thought. The sudden disappearance of Sarah Coleman shattered the town's peaceful facade, leaving residents bewildered and frightened. Sarah was a 33-year-old mother of one, deeply loved by her husband, Tom, and adored by her 7-year-old son, Luke. On the morning of May 12th, she left her home to visit a friend just a few streets away. She promised to be back before dinner. That promise was never fulfilled. When Sarah didn't return home, Tom initially thought she might have stayed longer than planned. He tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. As hours passed, worry turned to panic. By nightfall, Tom had contacted Sarah's friends and family, but no one had seen her. With a sinking feeling, he called the police. The investigation began swiftly. Officers canvassed the area, knocking on doors and searching nearby parks, trails, and wooded areas. Volunteers from the town joined the search, combing through fields and checking abandoned buildings. Posters with Sarah's smiling face were plastered on every lamppost, shop window, and bulletin board. The media picked up the story, broadcasting Sarah's disappearance statewide. Despite the overwhelming response, there were no solid leads. No one had seen Sarah after she left her house that morning. Her car was found parked in her driveway, and her wallet and phone were missing, suggesting she had taken them with her. Security cameras in the area showed nothing unusual. The police interviewed everyone in Sarah's life, from her family to her co-workers, but found no evidence of foul play. Weeks turned into months, and the search grew colder with each passing day. The lack of clues left both investigators and the community baffled. The Coleman family, once a symbol of happiness and stability, was now marked by grief and uncertainty. Luke, too young to understand the complexities of what had happened, often asked when his mother would come home. Tom, struggling with his own anguish, could only offer vague reassurances that felt like lies. The disappearance of Sarah Coleman hung over Hillsborough like a dark cloud. Rumors began to swirl. Some speculated that Sarah had left voluntarily, though those who knew her dismissed the idea outright. Others whispered about a stranger lurking in the area, but no one could produce evidence to support such theories. As the years passed, Sarah's case joined the growing list of unsolved mysteries in Hillsborough. Her family refused to give up hope, but the lack of answers weighed heavily on them. For the community, Sarah's disappearance was a turning point, a grim reminder that even in the most idyllic places, safety is never guaranteed. What no one could have predicted was that Sarah's case was just the beginning of something much darker, a shadow that would stretch over the town for years to come. 5 years after Sarah Coleman's disappearance, Hillsborough was a town still haunted by unanswered questions. Life moved forward, but unease lingered in the air. 4 more people had vanished since Sarah: an elderly man out on his morning walk, a college student on a late-night drive, a young mother heading to the grocery store, and a middle-aged businessman traveling for work. Each case was as baffling as the last. The victims seemed to have no connection, no pattern to their lives or routines. They simply disappeared without a trace. In 2010, the monotony of despair cracked when a hiker stumbled upon a chilling discovery. Deep in the woods on the outskirts of Hillsborough, where nature had long reclaimed abandoned properties, the hiker came across an unsettling patch of disturbed earth. What began as curiosity quickly turned to horror when he unearthed human remains. Shaken but determined, he called the authorities. When police arrived, they cordoned off the area and began a thorough investigation. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains belonged to Eric Talbot, the elderly man who had disappeared 5 years earlier. His body was partially preserved, but what stood out was the meticulous way he had been buried. Objects found with the remains: a pocket watch. A cane seemed deliberately placed, as though telling a story. It wasn't a hasty burial. It was staged. The discovery of Eric's body sent shockwaves through the community, but the terror was far from over. Over the following months, police discovered 3 more graves within a 5-mile radius. Each belonged to one of the other missing individuals. Like Eric, the bodies were carefully arranged with personal items nearby, as if someone wanted to immortalize their victims in a grotesque tableau. The town was thrust into a whirlwind of fear and speculation. Investigators now faced an undeniable truth. Hillsborough was home to a serial killer. The calculated nature of the burial suggested someone intelligent and deliberate, someone who had likely lived among them all these years. Among the discoveries, one stood out: a silver locket found near the final grave. It belonged to Sarah Coleman. While the other victims had been accounted for, Sarah's body was nowhere to be found. Her family, already devastated by years of uncertainty, found themselves grappling with new questions. Was Sarah still alive, or had her killer deliberately concealed her remains? The locket reignited interest in Sarah's case, but it also introduced a chilling possibility. The killer might still be active. The fact that her body was missing felt deliberate, almost like a taunt. It was a cruel twist in an already horrifying story. The police intensified their efforts, reopening files and re-examining evidence from Sarah's case. They followed leads, interrogated suspects, and enlisted experts to create a psychological profile of the killer. But for every question they answered, new ones emerged. Hillsborough, once a town defined by its close-knit community, now felt like a place of suspicion and dread. No one knew who to trust, and everyone wondered who among them could be capable of such unimaginable cruelty. In the years following the discovery of the graves, the Coleman family remained determined to uncover the truth about Sarah's disappearance. While the police focused on the broader investigation, Sarah's now adult son, Luke, took matters into his own hands. Driven by a mixture of grief and determination, he began meticulously going through his mother's belongings, hoping to find some overlooked clue. One afternoon, while sifting through a box of photographs and letters stored in the attic, Luke came across something that made his heart race. Tucked inside an old photo album was a picture he didn't recognize. In the image, his mother stood smiling beside a man Luke couldn't identify. He was tall, with dark hair and a confident posture. There was something unsettling about his presence, as though he didn't belong. Luke flipped the photo over and saw the date, April 2005, just weeks before Sarah disappeared. Luke couldn't shake the feeling that this man was significant. He showed the photo to family members and friends, but no one could identify him. Determined, he turned to technology, uploading the image to facial recognition software. When the results came back, Luke was stunned. The software matched the man to someone named Peter Harris, a name he had never heard before. But Peter Harris wasn't just anyone. He was a convicted felon with a history of violence and manipulation. What shocked Luke even more was discovering that Peter Harris had been living under a different name for the past 2 decades. In Hillsborough, he was known as Greg Walters, a friendly neighbor who had seamlessly integrated into the community. Greg had attended neighborhood barbecues, helped with charity events, and even comforted the Coleman family during their darkest times. He had been a part of their lives, blending in so perfectly that no one ever questioned him. Luke brought his discovery to the police, who immediately reopened the case with new urgency. A deeper investigation into Greg Walters, now identified as Peter Harris, revealed a chilling history. He had changed his identity after serving time for assault in another state and had moved to Hillsborough shortly before Sarah's disappearance. As investigators delved into his life, they uncovered small but telling inconsistencies. Greg had lied about his past, fabricated details about his family, and avoided personal questions with practiced ease. His demeanor, always calm and approachable, had allowed him to slip under the radar. He had lived among his victims' families, gaining their trust while hiding in plain sight. The most disturbing revelation came when police searched his home. In a locked room in the basement, they found a collection of items belonging to the victims: trinkets, photographs, and handwritten notes. Among them was Sarah's missing diary, its final entries providing chilling glimpses into her interactions with Greg in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The realization that the man who had comforted them was the same man who had likely caused their suffering was almost too much to bear. For the Coleman family and the entire town, it was a horrifying betrayal. Greg Walters, the helpful neighbor, had been a stranger all along, a stranger with a deadly secret. With Peter Harris exposed as Greg Walters, the friendly neighbor who had lived undetected in Hillsborough for 2 decades, the police launched an exhaustive investigation into his life. The community was stunned by the revelation, struggling to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster he truly was. Questions swirled about how someone so dangerous could have hidden in plain sight, earning trust and even building friendships with the very families he had destroyed. As detectives pieced together Peter Harris's timeline, a horrifying pattern emerged. His crimes were not random acts of violence, but the result of careful planning. Harris was a meticulous predator, targeting individuals he could manipulate or isolate. He had an uncanny ability to blend in, masking his true intentions behind a facade of charm and helpfulness. The locked room in his basement proved to be a treasure trove of evidence. The objects inside weren't just keepsakes, they were trophies. Each item was tied to one of his victims, a macabre way for Harris to relive his crimes. Investigators found Sarah Coleman's locket, the college student's car keys, and the elderly man's pocket watch, among other items. Each piece told a part of the story Harris had been carefully hiding. Most chilling of all was a journal discovered in the same room. Its pages were filled with cryptic notes, sketches, and maps. Harris had documented his crimes in unnerving detail, from the initial stalking of his victims to the precise locations of their burials. The journal revealed that he had been watching Sarah for months before her disappearance, ingratiating himself into her life and the lives of her family. One entry stood out among the rest. It described how Harris had lured Sarah into a false sense of security, using her trust against her. The journal suggested that she had been alive for weeks after her initial disappearance, kept hidden somewhere he felt confident no one would look. But then, abruptly, the entries about Sarah stopped. No explanation, no finality, just silence. It was as though he had deliberately left her fate ambiguous, a cruel twist to torment those searching for answers. Police also uncovered a series of maps with markings indicating burial sites. These led to the graves of the 4 confirmed victims, but one marked location remained disturbingly empty. This suggested Harris had planned to kill again but had been interrupted, likely by the growing scrutiny of the investigation. The psychological profile that emerged painted Harris as a cold, calculating sociopath. He thrived on control, both over his victims and the narrative surrounding his crimes. Living in Hillsborough for so long without arousing suspicion was part of his plan. By positioning himself as a helpful, unassuming neighbor, he deflected attention away from himself, even as he continued his deadly activity. The community struggled to process the betrayal. Parents who had trusted Harris with their children now wondered how close they had come to danger. Friends who had shared meals and stories with him questioned how they had missed the signs. For the Coleman family, the pain was unbearable. Harris hadn't just taken Sarah, he had lived among them, watched them grieve, and pretended to care. The revelation of Peter Harris's double life shattered the illusion of safety in Hillsborough. It was a grim reminder that evil often wears a familiar face, hiding where no one thinks to look. The arrest of Peter Harris sent shockwaves through Hillsborough, marking the end of a decades-long nightmare. For the Coleman family and the other victims' loved ones, the capture of the man responsible for so much pain was bittersweet. While justice was finally within reach, the revelations about Harris's crimes left deep scars that would take a lifetime to heal. The trial began in the spring of 2011, drawing national attention. Prosecutors meticulously laid out the evidence, presenting Harris as a manipulative, cold-blooded killer who had preyed on the vulnerable and hidden in plain sight. The jury listened in stunned silence as they were shown items recovered from Harris's home, including the journal that detailed his crimes. Experts testified about the psychological profile of a man who thrived on control, deriving pleasure from the pain and confusion he inflicted. The courtroom was packed every day, with survivors, family members, and curious onlookers eager to see justice served. Sarah Coleman's family sat in the front row, enduring the agonizing details of her final days. While Harris's journal suggested that Sarah had been his first victim, There were still unanswered questions about her fate. Her body had never been found, and Harris remained tight-lipped, refusing to give any further information. The most haunting testimony came from forensic experts who analyzed the journal and the staged burials. They described a man who treated murder as an art form, creating morbid tableaux to exert control even after death. Each burial was a carefully crafted message, a way for Harris to relive his crimes and assert his dominance over his victims and their families. Harris's defense team attempted to argue insanity, claiming that his actions were the result of severe mental illness. But the prosecution dismantled this argument by highlighting Harris's calculated behavior. His ability to integrate seamlessly into the community, maintain a false identity for decades, and evade suspicion spoke to a chilling level of intelligence and premeditation. The trial lasted for several weeks, and the verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Harris was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, he remained emotionless, showing no remorse for his actions. For the victims' families, it was a small victory, though it could never erase the pain he had caused. Even after his conviction, the mystery of Sarah Coleman lingered. Investigators continued to search for her remains, following every lead and revisiting old evidence. Her family held out hope that one day they would find her and give her the burial she deserved. The case left an indelible mark on Hillsborough. The town that had once been a symbol of tranquility was now synonymous with betrayal and horror. Neighbors became more cautious, trust was harder to come by, and the scars of Harris's crimes ran deep. The Coleman family, though devastated, found strength in each other. They vowed to honor Sarah's memory by raising awareness about the dangers of blind trust and the importance of vigilance. Her son, Luke, became an advocate for victims of violent crime, dedicating his life to ensuring that no one else would suffer the way his family had. In the end, the story of Peter Harris served as a chilling reminder that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they live among us, wearing the masks of friends, neighbors, and trusted confidants. It was a truth that Hillsborough would never forget.